Welcome to DigFed, your family and federal records. I'm Rhonda Hoffman. I'm the genealogy librarian in the Grosvenor Room at the Central Library in downtown Buffalo. Today I'm going to talk about the U.S. National Archives and Records Administration, lesser known genealogically rich federal records, where to find clues that your ancestors are in federal records, and identifying record groups for research. The National Archives has billions of records. Their main locations are in Washington, D.C. and College Park, Maryland. They also have 22 regional facilities and 14 presidential libraries. Some of the records at the National Archives will help you break down a brick wall, and others may provide some extra detail to your ancestors' lives. Throughout the presentation, I will often call the National Archives and Records Administration, NARA, so those are one and the same. I will also put NARA ID numbers on many of my slides. Each NARA record set has a unique identification number. It's kind of like a call number for a book in a library. Input that number in the NARA Catalog and you will easily find the record set. The number on the previous slide was for War of 1812 pension files and bounty land application files. These records are the first record types that we'll discuss. Note that if the records and/or the index to the records have been digitized, you'll see a blue Search Within This Series button. Sometimes the included indexes are not yet complete. We'll discuss the NARA Catalog further at the end of the presentation. First, I'll talk about some of the individual record sets. The first thing I'll talk about are military pension files. These files from the Revolutionary War up to the start of World War I are available at the National Archives in Washington, D.C. Military pension files are possibly the most genealogically rich of the military records. That's because an individual had to prove their military service. These records also list where the pensioner lived since service, so you'll see if they moved around. They usually list medical information because many pensioners claimed a pension due to a disability. They often list where the pensioner was born. And also, family members could apply for a pension after the soldier passed away, and they had to prove their relationship to the soldier. So you might see things like affidavits to witnesses of marriages, or Bible records that prove relationships, and other types of documents. This is a widow's pension application file for the War of 1812. Widows could collect their deceased husband's pensions as long as they were not married to someone else. Let me read what it says. And her name before her said marriage was Cortelyou, and she further states that she was married to William Cortelyou in May 1847, and that he died at Sheboygan, Wisconsin, December 24, 1854. That said soldier was married to a former wife named Sally Warden, who died in Lamartine in November 1860, state of Wisconsin. Here we see that her application provides her former husband's name, when they were married, and when and where he died. It also lists the soldier's former wife, including her name before marrying him, and when and where she died. Revolutionary War pension files are available in Ancestry Library Edition, which is a database available at every Buffalo and Erie County Public Library location. And now, during the time of the pause, it is available from home with a valid Buffalo and Erie County Public Library card. They are also available in Heritage Quest Online, which is available at every Buffalo and Erie County Public Library location and from home with a valid B&E CPL card. You can also search for a soldier's name in the NARA Catalog, and you may find his file there. Other war pension indexes are also available in Ancestry and the NARA Catalog. Also, there's a free website called FamilySearch.org where you can find some military pension indexes. If you want to order a pension file, you can obtain the files through NARA. Many people have heard of military pension files, but one record set that you may not have heard of is settled accounts for payment of accrued pensions, which date from 1838 through 1865. This came about by an 1838 law that says that heirs of pensioners for wars before 1860 could claim the amount of pension that accrued to a pensioner between the date of the last payment and the date of the soldier's death. These usually list the pensioner's date and place of death, the names of his heirs, and supporting documents such as proof of identity of the claimant, pension documents, power of attorney, and related correspondence. The Grosvenor Room at the Central Library carries an index to these records. The book which indexes the files are called The Lost Pensions, Settled Accounts of the Act of 6 April 1838 by Craig Robert Scott. It provides the name of the family member applying, the pension office, the box number at the National Archives, and the account number for the file. With those details, you can contact NARA for information on obtaining copies of the records. Many soldiers from the Revolutionary War up to the Civil War obtained free land for their military service. This is called military bounty land. Whether or not your ancestor had a pension or bounty land depended on the laws of the time. Soldiers had to prove their military service, and heirs had to prove their relationships to the soldier. This is an example document from a bounty land file. This relates to the same widow whose pension application that we looked at earlier. So here you can see that it names the soldier's parents, Elijah Fancher, and that his mother's name is Charlotte. He was a farmer. They lived in Fond du Lac, Wisconsin. It gives the birthplace of the soldier, Paulding's, Dutchess County, New York. And it also names the parents of the widow, Isaac Bassett and Sarah. It also lists the marriage date, place, the type of ceremony, and the person performing the marriage ceremony. Another document in the file provides the soldier's date of death, which is the 10th of October in 1875. Often the bounty land file is included with the pension file, and/or you will see the bounty land application number in a military pension index. That's what we see here is a pension index, and you can see the bounty land number is squared off in red. Ancestry Library Edition, which I talked about earlier, has some military pension indexes. What many people don't know is that there are over 360,000 unindexed bounty land files. Those files are for persons who served between 1812 and 1855, though there are some rejected Revolutionary War bounty land applications included too. Some pension application indexes do not list a bounty land file number, yet one exists in the unindexed files. This is an example from a gentleman named Aretas L. Root, and you can see where it says bounty land that there's no number listed. Aretas did in fact have a bounty land file, and here is a document from it. You can see it says bounty land on the top, and the claimant is Aretas L. Root. The unindexed bounty land files are in alphabetical order, but before recently there was no index to the files. Fold 3, a subscription genealogy database, is indexing the records and creating a free online index to the files. Right now the index is complete through the letter L. to find out if your ancestor has a file in the unindexed records and their last name begins with M forward, check with the National Archives. The archives can also provide you with a copy of the file for a fee. Did your relatives move west? One of the reasons you might think your ancestor had a bounty land file is because you find that they moved west to a public land state, or you find them listed in the Bureau of Land Management General Land Office database. This is the General Land Office Records website. You can search for your ancestor by name as well as other criteria. In this search, I searched for Elias Fancher, the aforementioned War of 1812 veteran. I did in fact find him in the database. First, look at the names on the document. Here we see Elias with a W next to his name. This means that he had a warrant from military land. Also, under the miscellaneous information section, there should be a reference to military service in the militia field. The authority will also name the law under which the individual obtained the land. Most soldiers who received bounty land did not live on the land themselves. They usually sold or assigned their warrants to others. So the secondary name or names on the entry would be who the land warrant was assigned to by the soldier. Here it was sold to John T. Callan. On the Patent Image tab, you can see the land patent. It will list the military service, if any, and the land warrant number, and a land description. If it was assigned to anyone else other than the soldier, it would be listed here, and you can see that the arrow is pointing to John Callan. This database will also show you where the land was located on a modern map. It also includes early land surveys. This is the land plat image. If you click on related documents, you can see nearby properties. So maybe you'll see some family member names living nearby. If you do find your ancestor in this database, there are likely more records than you can find in the database, called land entry case files. There are different types of land files. One of those types may be from the Homestead Act of 1862, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Private land claims, where these are claims to a land purchase or granted by governments that previously owned the land. These could be very detailed and include descriptions of heirs of each generation involved, family structures, time periods, and places of migration. You might also find testimonies of witnesses of these people living on the land, and these took precedent over newly surveyed land. To have a file dedicated to a person, that person would have had to have been the first to purchase or be granted land from the U.S. federal government. This is an example of a cash sale, non-military land purchase. From 1800 to 1820, land could have been bought via credit as well. Individuals were given 4 years to pay it off, but many couldn't afford the payments. During the Civil War, the U.S. wanted settlers loyal to the Union. They also wanted land for immigrants. So they made the Homestead Act. This was May 20th, 1862. Any adult citizen or intended citizen could get free land up to 160 acres. In 1909, this changed to 320 acres. They had to improve the property, including building a dwelling, cultivating crops, and they had to stay on the land for 5 years. In 1912, this was changed to 3 years. Only about 40% of homesteaders completed the process. Also, U.S. soldiers could deduct active military duty from the residence period up to 4 years. So this was an incentive for enlistment. This is a homestead entry. This is a document from a homestead land entry file, and it gives a description of the work that's been done on the property so far. So it says that this Samuel Root built a structure 1 story high. It's 16 by 24 feet in size, has 2 doors and 1 window, a board roof and board floors, and it's a frame house, and it says it's comfortable to live in. Included in Samuel Root's file is a transcription of his military discharge papers. Here we see what unit he was with during the Civil War, when and where he was in the war. It says that he was discharged in May of 1865 at New York City. It also says he was born in Orleans County, New York. It says he's 18 years old, and it says he's 5'6" inches high, with a light complexion, blue eyes, and light hair. I wondered why his military discharge paper was in the file, because Civil War veterans didn't get bounty land. The law cited allowed for someone who was loyal to the U.S. and honorably discharged from the U.S. military could deduct their service time from the time that they had to live on the land before it became theirs. Homesteaders had to prove they met the requirements in order to make the land theirs, and there might be affidavits and testimonies in the file that include information about family members, immigration and naturalization information, military service, birth, marriage, death information, especially in the case of inheritance. There will also be affidavits as to what they did to improve the land. Neighbors might give testimony, and they might give reports to someone that wasn't living on the land like they were supposed to, or to call into question a person's character. The records for those who were denied a patent may include more information than those who obtained the patent. Do you find your ancestor living in a public land state, but you can't find them in the database? If they started the homesteading process but didn't complete it, these files exist, but they're not indexed. To find their file, you'll need to search the land tract books for the area that they settled. Tract books for Alaska and Missouri have been lost. Unfortunately, there's no alphabetical index to these. You'll need to know the township and range numbers for their land. Use the website Histopolis to find the township and range numbers for the town where you found them living. First, choose the Place menu and select United States. Then choose the appropriate state and city. The city chosen here is the village of Bellevue in Bellevue Township, Eaton County, Michigan. Once you find the correct city, look for the Surveys section on the website, which will provide the township, range, and meridian. For our example here, it's Township 1 North, Range 6 West, Michigan Meridian. There's a Family Search Wiki article that includes what township and ranges are in which tract book. Find the volume that covers both the township and range for the town that you're seeking. Then go to FamilySearch.org and go to the catalog and search in the titles field. In the title field, input the words United States Bureau of Land Management Tract Books. Under the Notes section, there will be a link to click. Click where it says Here. Scroll through the volume, looking at the tops of the pages to find the correct township and range. Once you get to the right page, you'll see the details that you need to order a copy of the land entry case file. What you need is a description of the land. So here we see the name of the purchaser, Charles G. Rolfe. It gives the section, township, range, the size of the acreage. It gives the date of the sale, the certificate number, and you can see it also says canceled March 11th in 1874. Next, we'll move on to Confederate slave rolls, which date from 1861 to 1865. These were payrolls for enslaved labor on Confederate military defenses. Slaveholders were pressured or required to have enslaved persons worked for the Confederate military, though they did collect pay for their work. These records are online, and you can keyword search them through the NARA Catalog. Possible terms to input are the first name of the formerly enslaved person or a combination of first names if you think family members were together during slavery. You could try the surname of the slaveholder if known, or the surname of the formerly enslaved persons if you think that they may have taken the slaveholder's name. Also locations where the formerly enslaved ancestors lived. This is a payroll from August of 1863 at the Ashley Ferry Nitro Works. The town is Ashley River Ferry Town, South Carolina. If we zoom in, you can see that the enslaved are named by first name only. The occupation is listed. They're all listed as laborers. The number of days employed is listed, 26 days. It gives each of the individuals pay per day and the total pay for the days that they work. And for our purposes here today, I'd like to point out the names Jane and Thomas on this list. These also list the slaveholder's name, and that person is listed as M.B. Hazard. So I wanted to see just how useful these lists could be. Could I even go anywhere from the information on these lists? So I first started by trying to research the slaveholder listed. I didn't find any hazards listed in South Carolina, but I did find some in Glynn County, Georgia. This is an 1860 U.S. Federal Census schedules of the enslaved. And there are 3 slaveholders listed here: William W. Hazard, there's a William M. Hazard, and there's another name, Peg Hazard, who may or may not be a slaveholder. I thought with the initials MB, maybe it could be Margaret and Peg could be a nickname, but we see here that Peg Hazard is listed in parentheses. And the age of the enslaved person on this line says 110. So I'm not sure if this is the name of a slaveholder and she's in parentheses because she's a woman, or if because this enslaved person was 110, anyone who was 100 years or older was usually named on the schedule. Normally the enslaved are not named on the schedules, only the slaveholder, and the enslaved persons are listed by age, gender, and color. So I looked in the general population schedules for hazards in Glynn County and found a Mary B. Hazard, who was the wife of William W. Hazard and who had a child, William M. Hazard. And the personal estate of the husband is quite large. Both Mary and both of the Williams were from South Carolina, so they did have ties there. There was also a Mary A.R. Miles, who was 81, living with them. And I thought perhaps this is Mary's mother, and the Miles may be William, the son's middle name. And perhaps Mary's father died recently and Mary inherited a plantation or enslaved persons from her family and they were still in South Carolina, or maybe they had land in both locations. So I wanted to search further on this family to see if there were some connections to some of the enslaved persons from the list with this family. And I found that William had a War of 1812 pension file, and I accessed that record, and a document in it provided his date of death, which was the 2nd of July, 1861, and it also gave Mary's middle and maiden name. So her maiden name was Mary Blake Miles, which connected her to the Mary Miles, who was living with them. This document states that William died in Charleston, South Carolina, and that Mary is living in Charleston when she applies for the pension, which was in the 1870s. So she possibly lived there from William's death, 1861, into the 1870s. I looked into William's estate file. Estate files are good places to look for names of the enslaved because enslaved persons were considered property. An item in William's estate file shows 2 of the enslaved persons' names, Jane and Thomas. Though they are common names, they do match 2 of the names on the Confederate slave list. So I wanted to find out, did Mary have the right to be listed as a slaveholder on the slave roll that we looked at? And I looked into William's will, and in fact it does give full rights to his property to his wife Mary, including the enslaved persons. This, if you read it, it also indicates that she had her own enslaved as well. Some of the descriptions of the property in the estate records provided names of locations associated with the hazards. West Point on St. Simon's Island was mentioned, and it led me to a modern website with historical information. It also led me to a description of the island, and this was a history that was actually written by William Wiggs Hazard about the history of St. Simon's Island. The library had a book on St. Simon's Island, and it stated that in 1862, St. Simon's was occupied by Union forces, and that it became a camp for formerly enslaved persons, and that many locals left the area. So maybe this is why the family left the area, although they appeared to leave earlier than 1862. So obviously there's more searching required to try to link the Jane and Thomas that we saw to the right slaveholder, but I think we've started a pretty good case that they are the Hazard family that we found. You could look for more records related to the Hazard family, such as deeds, tax records. You could also look at Freedmen's Bureau records for labor contracts, which may list the formerly enslaved in labor contracts with the Hazards. There are some really interesting immigration records that a lot of people haven't heard of. There are something called special inquiry lists that are mixed in with some passenger lists. In the early 1890s, you may see the notation SI next to a passenger's name on a passenger list. And in 1903, the Port of New York City included an additional form naming those for who a special inquiry was done and giving more detail. These will be mixed in with the passenger lists. So if you do find your ancestor's name on a special inquiry list or record of detained aliens, something about your ancestor prompted officials to inspect your ancestor further. This is part of a passenger list for Giuseppe Giliberti. You can see that there is a notation that he was deported. Underneath that stamp, I believe the letters to be SI for special inquiry. So here's an example of the record of aliens held for special inquiry. It's the same list that we just were looking at, but in smaller scale. And if you look at these lists, a large percentage of individuals held for special inquiry are allowed into the country. If you see that your ancestor appealed the special inquiry's decision, that your ancestor was held for a long time, that they were deported, or other clues, there may be further documentation through the National Archives. Here you can see by the note "Hold on Appeal," where the arrow is, that Giuseppe and his family appealed the special inquiry. You should also note that the family was kept at Ellis Island for about 2 months. That's on the second image with the arrow. These are the number of meals that the 5 family members had at Ellis Island. So if you do the math, you'll see that they were there for about 2 months. This is the NARA Catalog. The ID is for a record set that may include correspondence which pertains to a special inquiry appeal. It's a partial index to the correspondence files of the Office of the Commissioner General of Immigration in Washington, D.C. It provides the case file number necessary to retrieve the correspondence. You can see that there is a search within the series button, which I clicked, and the next slide shows where I did a search for Giliberti, Giuseppe's last name. And you can see with the red boxed off square that I did find Giuseppe Giliberti. If I click on that entry, I see an index card with his name on it. So Giuseppe is listed here on the card, and it says he and his family, it says New York, and it says Black Hand by him, and I thought that was intriguing, so I looked that up. And what I found out is that Black Hand was a type of extortion racket popular in the late 1800s and early 1900s in the U.S., and it dates back to the 1750s in Sicily. Successful Italians would receive a threatening letter, and if the person didn't pay, there was a threat to harm them if not paid. Italian immigrants would do this to successful Italian immigrants. Usually the letter included various threatening images and was signed with an imprinted black hand, which is where the name came from. In order to order his case file, you would need the file number, and that is listed here, the number right before his name. Something you can also do to see if there's more information about him is just to search for the name of the person you're looking for in the NARA catalog. The search returned some naturalization cards of a different Giuseppe Giliberti, as well as the previous index card. Something that we can also look forward to in the future as another place to search for information on your immigrant ancestor is a record set called Letters Received 1882 through 1906. There are 154 boxes of immigration correspondence in this set, and I was told at a conference last summer that a name index will be online for this in the near future. It's not up there yet. The content of these letters include appeals from debarred immigrants and reports of deportations because of violations of the contract labor laws. So this is another place where there could be information about Giuseppe. There's also an Ancestry database that may be helpful. It's called U.S. Subject Indexed Correspondence and Case Files of the Immigration and Naturalization Service from 1903 to 1959. I didn't find Giuseppe in here, but I perused them just to see the type of content that was in here. Alphabetically, if you look alphabetically by boards of special inquiry, you might see your ancestor's name. So I pointed out here, for example, Walker case. So if your ancestor had the last name Walker and they were held for a special inquiry around this date, you would want to check this file with the file number listed here. I also found some entries under Buffalo, New York. I thought this was an interesting one. It says there's a report concerning Fred and Annie Schubert who entered Canada claiming to be U.S.-born citizens. Also regarding the possible prosecution of Fred J. Lean, taxi driver, who aided them to enter Canada illegally. And there's a requested investigation of the status of Carla Marcuson, another sister. And it mentions the FBI there. There was also a section on detention facilities. So this would be where the aliens would be detained if they weren't let into the country for some reason. Buffalo is listed here. So if you were curious, what were the conditions like at Buffalo's border crossing detention facilities? You could contact the archives about what you see listed here and maybe get a copy of the file. There was a section on smugglers, and there was one from Buffalo. Buffalo forwards a report regarding the apprehension of John T. Kane by customs officers driving an automobile belonging to a smuggler containing liquor. So wouldn't that be a great find if you found something like that about your ancestor? Other headings in that ancestry index that you could browse, you could look up vessel names, immigration station names, the section called Expatriation of Immigrants, and Entry Legalized. So I was really curious about Giuseppe's file from the first card that we looked at. So I went ahead and ordered a copy of the file. And it was very interesting. Here it says the only ground for the exclusion of these immigrants seems to be that the immigrant Giuseppe Giliberti, the father, is a disreputable man and a member of the Black Hand Society. This is only a suspect that he is. At the hearing before the board, the immigrant was accused by Pisciotta Tommaso, who presented 2 anonymous letters which he believes that the immigrant wrote just before he left this country. So Giuseppe was in the country before this time that he was trying to enter and was held back and left and then had trouble coming back into the country. So I wondered how would they even know that Giuseppe might have been a Black Hand? And what happened is that the person who accused him heard that he was coming back into the U.S. and warned immigration officials to look out for him. So that's how they suspected him of being a Black Hand. His file included a lot of useful information about him and his family. It says that he was 48. His wife's name was Maria Piazza. She was 47. His children were Giuseppe, 14, Maria Grazia, 9, and Ottavio, 6, and that they were traveling alone. They were natives of Italy, and that he has a son, 12, in Italy, who was staying with his brother, and that he has 2 daughters and 1 son in America. The son is Francesco, 19, the daughters are Vital, 21, single, Antonia, 17, single. and that they can all read and write except the youngest child, and that they came on the SS Cecilia. It says that he has no trade, and while he was in America previously, he worked a bit as a carpenter and then had a bakery on his own. That he was here for 34 months and returned to Italy 10 months ago, and that was in order to bring back his wife and children. And that this time he was going to stay with his children who were in the country, though he did not let them know ahead of a time. And it gives their address in Brooklyn. This document gives more information about his adult daughter. It says that she's Antonina, she's 17, it gives her address. It says that she's employed in the candy manufacturing establishment of Mr. Greenfield on Lorimer Street in Brooklyn. It tells that she makes $7 a week and that she's willing and ready to give whatever she earns to her parents. This is part of the testimony of Mr. Peixoto, who accused Giuseppe of being a black hand, and he brought in letters and a card that he believes that Giuseppe sent to him in order to blackmail him. And this is what he said that the letter says. Dear Mozzie, tonight will decide your fate. Bring $500 on Wednesday at midnight in the Marcy Avenue Park. In a pathway to the left, you'll find 5 persons, but do not look at them. I am not to be trifled with. If you fail, you will be killed like a dog on Thursday. There's no signature to it. Another envelope, dated a little bit later, says, I wrote you a letter for Wednesday, and you did not answer. If you do not bring $500 by Saturday by midnight in the Marcy Avenue Park, Monday you will be killed like a dog. This is the last warning that I write to you. Seems like killed like a dog was a big thing back then. Then there was another postcard to someone that lived in the same residence as Peixoto, a man named Salvatore. And this letter told him to leave tomorrow evening at 8 and take your relatives out for a walk, and to leave Mr. Peixoto home alone. So just to summarize what was found, essentially Peixoto believes that Gilberti to be the black hand because Gilberti came to his house the night that his neighbor was supposed to leave Peixoto alone, and that because after Giuseppe left Peixoto's home, Peixoto found one black glove, which was the sign of a black hand. Also, in Giuseppe's testimony, he said that he had owned a bakery, and interviews from other persons said that Gilberti did not own a bakery, so that made him look suspicious. In the end, he and his family were deported. Next, I'm going to move on to legislative records. Did your ancestor interact with Congress? This possibility is much more likely than you think. Some reasons why they may have interacted include to receive an increase in a military pension, issues related to federal land, to receive payment for services rendered or supplies given to the federal government, for example, during war years, immigration issues, or a patent extension. One place that you could see if your ancestor interacted with the government is by using the U.S. serial set, which is a set of documents ordered to be published by Congress. Some of this serial set is available in a database called Heritage Quest Online, which I mentioned earlier. That's available to you from the library at any one of our locations and from home with a library card. This is the front screen of Heritage Quest. And here's where you would search the serial set. The best way to search it is simply by just putting a name in the person field, unless it's a really common name. If it's a really common name, you might want to put a place name in there too, like John Smith and the town Buffalo or wherever else they lived. But what I did is I searched for a man named Eli Hart, and I came up with this document, which has to do with houses burnt at Buffalo by the British in 1813 during the War of 1812. So Eli Hart wanted over $6,000 because some of his buildings were destroyed when the British came through. So I thought, wow, if there are more documents associated with this at NARA, it could be really interesting. Another place where we have access to the serial set is through Hine Online, which is a database for use at every Buffalo and Erie County Public Library location, but not from home. It is a legal database. When you enter the database, you click where it says U.S. Federal, then click the U.S. Congressional Serial Set. If you find evidence of interaction with Congress, you can contact NARA regarding obtaining legislative documents. If you have an ancestor who was a federal government employee, you'll want to look in the official register of the United States. The time frame that this was published was from 1817 through 1959. From 1817 through 1920, it was published every 2 years. And from 1921 to 1959, it was published every year. The website listed here is a way to access the official register. This is the home page of the database that I just showed you the website for. A good way to search it is by putting the search terms official register for the title search field, and in the full text field put the first name and then the word near/3 and then the last name. So John near/3 Smith will return hits with the word John and Smith within 3 words of each other. Another thing that you could do for the title field, if you want to look at a particular year of the register, is put the terms official register and then whatever year you're looking for. Here we did 1835. So here's the search results, and you can click on the title, and then you can see inside of the book. There's an index at the beginning, and something that drew my eye were collectors of customs. And I saw a section for New York, so I wanted to see what was there. And I found a section for Buffalo Creek. So we see the different collectors and inspectors' names, where they were employed. So we see Buffalo, Black Rock, Tonawanda, Dunkirk, Portland Harbor, Silver Creek. And it asks where those people were born. It gives a state they were born and then their salary. Here we see a post office department, and this lists clerks at the post offices. So there is a section alphabetically for Buffalo, and it gives the same type of information that we saw for the customs collectors. So I started thinking more about what types of local federal offices we have here, and I thought of the IRS. So we see a good range of people who work for the IRS, not just accountants. We see a deputy collector, storekeepers, and gaugers, and we see the same type of information, where they were born, where and what congressional district they're appointed for, where they're employed, and their compensation. There's also a section on steamboat inspection. This is a section on employees and public buildings. So there's the post office building listed here, and it includes everyone who works there: custodians, engineers, electricians, watchmen, elevator conductors, and more. This is a section for U.S. Circuit and District Courts. There's a section on Buffalo here, so we see clerks and stenographers and attorneys. 1879 was the first year to include an every name index, so you didn't have to look for categories like we did in our examples. You could actually just look up somebody by name. Another idea for federal involvement with your ancestors is the Civilian Conservation Corps. I think a lot of us had someone who worked for the CCC. There are camp inspection reports from 1933 through 1942 for the CCC. The CCC provided training to unemployed youth, war veterans, and Native Americans. And these records would help provide details about what life was like for these folks when they were working at the camps. They include things like conditions of buildings, status of medical services, descriptions of projects at each camp, menus and nutritions, standards of educational facilities and programs, recreational activities, and there could be correspondence about the conduct of enrollees and supervisory personnel. This is the record for those camp inspection reports. In the NARA Catalog, you can search within the series for the camp name to find the camp you're looking for. The Bureau of Indian Affairs has some records related to federal Native American boarding schools. Many of these were started in the late 1800s and early 1900s. And what happened at the schools were that it was a way to try to force assimilate Native Americans into Euro-American way of life. So their clothing, hairstyle, name, religion were changed to European American styles and beliefs, and they received a basic education. There are student records that exist and are available for genealogy research. The Carlisle Indian Industrial School at Carlisle, Pennsylvania existed from 1879 until 1918. It was the first government-operated non-reservation boarding school for Native Americans. And there's a website here that you can go to search the records. Here you can see that you can search by nation or tribe. You can search for a partial or full student name. I searched for this tribe using Seneca and the last name Jimerson. So here we see an example of a student record, and one thing I wanted to point out from this record is that we see the Native American name listed here, as well as other details. This is another example for Eugene Jones Jimerson, and I think it's important because it lists his birth parents' names, also his adopted father's name, and when the father died, and the tribe, which is the Tonawanda Band of Senecas. This is an application for enrollment at Carlisle. This is for Theodore Jimerson, and it gives the date of birth November 18th, 1889. It gives the parents' names. It says they're both deceased. It says they're both Seneca, and they're both full Seneca. The school would write follow-up letters and hope to get a response from students. Some did answer. In this example, you can see that they asked for marital information. The young lady's name is Izora Brooks, and it says that she was married to Willie Brooks, that they live in Versailles in Cattaraugus County, that she's a housekeeper, and that they have their own home, about 400 acres of land, and cows and horses. Other information that you may learn includes grades of students, health information, information about work habits from individuals who the children were sent out to work for. That was usually part of the school, is that they would go and work in someone's home, as well as other correspondence. So the last section of our class is learning about federal records. There's a great book that we have in the Grosvenor Room. It's also available for free online at Hathy Trust. It's called A Guide to Genealogical Research in the National Archives. It is a very detailed list of records and the genealogical information that you'll find in them. It's good for those looking for new research possibilities for more heavily genealogical records. So this is the table of contents for that book. So think about what you know about your ancestors, what categories they might fit in here, and then read that section that you think they may be related to. There's another set of books called The Guide to Federal Records in the National Archives of the United States. We do have it in the Grosvenor Room. It's also available on the NARA website. It's 3 volumes. It's the most comprehensive of books about the records at the archives. It covers all materials, not just those with genealogically heavy data. There's also a section on the NARA website that's called Digitized by Their Partners. So these are records that have been digitized by companies or organizations that the NARA has partnered with. So you'll need to know a microfilm number. That's the most helpful. And then you can search the page for the microfilm number, and it'll tell you the title of the publication and what partner it is that digitized the record. So you'll see companies like Ancestry.com, Fold3, or Family Search, and then you can click on the link and it'll take you to those records. Some may be available freely online, and others you may have to subscribe to the database to access. If you found something and you wanted to learn more about the records than was perhaps told in the book where you found the microfilm listed, you can go to the NARA website and use the online order records link and put in the microfilm number. Here it's M1932 and click search. And then in your results, it'll say publication title. If you click there, it will give you to the right a section called Publication Details. And where it says View Important Publication Details, you can click on that and read a very detailed explanation of those records. The Allen County Public Library is in Fort Wayne, Indiana, and it's one of the largest genealogy libraries in the U.S. The ACPL has digitized some of the National Archives finding aids. The reason they're digitizing them is because they hold a lot of NARA microfilm at their facility. You can keyword search the finding aids, or you could browse them by clicking their names below the search box. Prologue Magazine is a National Archives product that includes many great articles related to genealogy. Many of these are online, so you can visit the website and choose a topic of interest to read the articles. This is an example about Freedmen's Bureau marriage records. Another good place to look is a blog called The 12 Key. It's by Claire Kluskins, a senior archivist at the National Archives. We're almost done, but I did want to remind you again that there are more than one NARA locations. So these are all the different cities that you might find a National Archives site. So when you're looking at the online catalog through NARA, you'll want to pay attention to where the records are kept. The NARA Catalog searches both the catalog and the NARA website. 95% of the series at NARA are included in the catalog, but not quite everything. The catalog includes all NARA locations and the presidential libraries, so again, pay attention to when you find something, pay attention to where it's kept. It does not search for similar words, so you must type in alternative search words for similar terms in the catalog. And NARA is aware that their catalog can be slow at times because it gets used so much. So you'll want to know that when you're using it, that it's something they're aware of and trying to remedy. So I hope you learned a lot about federal records today. When the library reopens after the COVID-19 pause, we would love to assist you at the library in your federal records search. Thank you and have a good day.